what I do is I empower parents and educators with the skills, and I'm saying skills intentionally. I'll get to that, but the skills they need to support anxious kids so that those kids get to thrive with courage and calm confidence, so that they're no longer being held back by anxiety. They get to live life full of possibilities. It's limitless. So many people actually think that anxiety is something that they're stuck with for their whole life, whereas I describe anxiety as an emotional state that you're in, and it's actually meant to come and go. It's not meant to stay with us forever. And many people think it does stay with them, that that's who they are, and they identify themselves with it, but it doesn't have to be that way. So it's very exciting and it's very cool what I'm doing, because I'm showing people that it doesn't have to be that way, and how they can change things, how they can turn things around.
So take us through the genesis of this. How did you get started and why?
Yeah, I love that question. So I worked as a teacher for 32 years in the school system. Absolutely love, love, love working with kids. I just think kids are the best. And I think they're very underrated at times and not acknowledged for how smart and able they are. Um, they're just as important as us adults. They're every bit as important. In fact, I think you could almost say more so, because they're the future. um, so I love working with kids. So I loved teaching kids. What I noticed was that there were many kids. I got into the wellbeing space. So I qualified myself to become student wellbeing. I got into the wellbeing space, the health space, and I was teaching, and I was in leadership and student management. And I pretty much saw it all. I saw, yes, you've got all these kids that fit in and, they cope, but there's a lot of kids that don't. And there's a lot of kids that are experiencing real struggles and challenges in life. And I felt like the system wasn't helping those kids very well. I would say the system was letting many kids down, the kids who were struggling or feeling the challenge. And I think what I began to realize was that there was a bit of a disconnect between what kids need and what the adults in their world think they need. And I noticed that if we don't tune into our kids and help them be who they are and help them thrive and be their, what I describe as their true self, what happens is us adults can often impose what we think kids should be doing and how they should be living their life and what they should be learning and how they should be learning and all these things. And we tend to impose a lot onto kids. So then kids can feel quite conflicted because they're trying to fit in to what they should be doing. And that is anxiety provoking in itself, because they're living out of alignment with many kids can be living out of alignment with who they really are and what they're meant to be, who they're meant to be. This can happen in the home, this can happen in the school, it can happen anywhere. So I found that there was often a disconnect between what adults think kids need and what they should be doing and what kids actually need and should be doing for themselves. So I started to realize that if we don't tune into kids and we don't connect with them at a really deep level and we don't value them, like really value them and honor them, then there's a disconnect, and those kids can lose trust in the adults in their world. And they can feel quite alone and can feel quite misaligned and conflicted. So I'm not blaming adults because I'm one. And I certainly stuffed up plenty of times, plenty of times. It's not until I began to realize what kids need that I started to change myself too. And for me, it all started really, I was in the school system, but I was really prompted because I was a parent and I thought I knew what I needed to do as a parent. I thought I knew what my kids needed. And it turns out that I thought I was a pretty good parent, but now that I look back, I stuffed up quite a lot. And I contributed to my children's anxiety. And it turns out that my daughter, my oldest daughter, it's all started with her because we kind of hit crisis point. She was behaving in ways, she was very tumultuous, she was in turmoil, she was emotional, she was anxious, but I didn't know that at the time. I didn't even know what anxiety was. So I've come a long way. And I was raising this child who was, in my head, impossible. Like, she was difficult, she was high maintenance. I was just labeling her and putting all these things on her, thinking that it was her until we hit crisis point and I went and sought some help. Unfortunately, that help wasn't helpful for me. So then I went further and then I started my own journey. And I thought, well, this isn't good enough. I'm being told that I'm doing the best I can, but I've got a child in crisis and a relationship with my child in crisis. I've got to do better than this. So I started exploring and I started my own personal journey. And part of that journey was taking a damn good look at myself in the mirror and looking at what I was doing and how I was functioning. And guess what I discovered? I discovered that I had experienced anxiety for 4 decades, every day of my life. And it was significant. I discovered now what anxiety was. And I knew my story because I'd been an extremely anxious kid. I didn't know, I didn't have a label for it. Back then, I just thought there was something wrong with me. My parents and my brothers and sisters told me there was something wrong with me and just to shut up and stop carrying on, kind of thing. I had no idea that I had been experiencing anxiety. And I had no idea that my needs weren't, my emotional needs weren't really being met. And I didn't know how to meet them myself. So it turns out, how was I going to raise a child with what I describe as an anxious disposition, which means it doesn't mean it has to present itself in any negative way, but highly sensitive human beings, there's plenty of us around. And when we've got that extra sensitivity, we can be more prone to anxiety. And I was a pretty sensitive little kid. And instead of being acknowledged and validated for how I was feeling, unintentionally, I know my parents loved me and I know they did their best, but unintentionally, they bypassed my emotional needs. And I felt, so I learned to shut down, to not show, not get upset, not express myself. And because they tell me, stop arguing, stop asking questions, stop this, stop that, because I had a very curious mind, because that goes hand in hand with an anxious temperament. You're very curious. However, if that anxiety begins to take over you, you lose that curiosity. You lose a lot of your beautiful traits because you're struggling and you're in crisis and you're in fear and protection mode because you've got this heightened defense mechanism going on. So I realise now, for 4 decades, I reckon every waking moment, I had anxiety. It was just there. It lived in me. I just thought, I've got this weird condition and nobody knows what it is. There's something wrong with me, but I'm just going to soldier on anyway. So
So
I guess,
if I may
yeah, go on.
interject and just add something, because there's a point that you mentioned that I hear quite a bit, and it's in regards to as a child, I was experiencing this and it led me to go there. And one thing I want to share with you is that there's so many people that can pinpoint a lot of their struggles to their childhood. We sometimes, I think we forget that doing the best that you can sometimes, well, I'm not going to be as nice. Doing the best that you can a lot of times is not good enough,
Oh,
right? But the
yeah.
unfortunate part about it is when it's a family member, it's such a sensitive topic. Like, how does a child go to the parent and say that the way you raised me wasn't good enough? Because this is a conversation that you're probably going to have in your adulthood. So it could be 5, 10, 15 years of this type of treatment that has impacted you in so many different ways that you can't even begin to imagine. Or if it's someone that you're married to or someone that you're dating and you're going to them and saying that after 10 years, this is how I felt being with you. I'm letting
Mm,
you know this now because your emotional output, it's hit the fan. You
yeah,
can't deal with it anymore. You can't contain it anymore. And you
yeah,
simply can't run away from the feeling. So when you mentioned that you were going through the anxiety and then your daughter was going through it, was it at that point like a clash of the different sorts of anxiety? Or is it more so just maybe a difference in upbringing because you know the upbringing that you had, and maybe you're trying to resolve that in some manner to make sure that she doesn't go through it, but now you're overcompensating. Was it something like that?
oh, such a good question. Let's just say that when we hit crisis point, now I look back, I didn't know what the frick I was doing. I thought I did, but I didn't. And I wasn't meeting her emotional needs. I wasn't tuning in. And guess why? Because I'd never learned how to do it for myself. Because it starts here. So I describe myself as the inside out lady. It's an inside out job. Some people talk about top down and bottom up and approaches. I talk about inside out because we're so busy focusing on the external, what's going on around us, and blaming and, pointing fingers over there, what's happening to me, but we're not focusing on here. So I guess in part answer to your question, I didn't really know what I was doing. However, throughout my journey, I learned and I was, wow, oh, oh my God, I could have done this and I didn't. And far out, a lot of guilt and shame comes up. A lot, lot. Because had I known, I wouldn't have done that. So I often say, we don't know what we don't know. And I agree. We're doing the best we can with the tools we have, but far out, some of us have got some pretty shitty tools. And some of us have that the generational pattern has passed on those tools with us thinking, well, this is the way it is. This is how things are done. We learn from our culture. We learn from our upbringing. We learn, well, this is the way it's done. And we don't question it because when we're very little, we're very impactful and we form our blueprint of how the world works. And especially between age 0 to 7, can be up to 10 even. So we're just laying down the rules of society and how the world works. And if our parents tell us it's this way, it's like, oh, okay, it's that way. But now, later on in my life, in those later years, I've had all these realizations of, oh wow, well that was BS that I was told when I was a kid. That I believed that, and I put myself under all this pressure, and I thought that, I was afraid of failing. My parents put so much pressure on performance. No wonder I've experienced performance anxiety. And they put so much pressure on us not failing and not expressing ourselves and looking good and showing everyone how successful we are and blah, 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 all that facade, but not speaking the real truth, not speaking that raw, vulnerable truth. That wasn't allowed. It wasn't said out loud, but it wasn't allowed. It was this quiet secret behind the shades. It was behind what was going on. Like, that's what was going on. And I was learning all these rules and ways of functioning that were not actually serving me. But my parents didn't know any better either. So I've moved through I certainly had a lot of anger toward my parents when I discovered what had happened, and I discovered why I was what I was, and why things had turned out the way. And then I realized, well, my daughter's got every right to be angry at me too, because I've repeated this generational pattern. It was repeating. So there's been a lot of work I've worked on, and rebuilding my relationship with my daughter, and being vulnerable and wearing and owning my part in it. And it's helped just no end. I mean, even my daughter, a couple of weeks ago, we were doing this little thing. It was actually at Christmas, and we were giving each other a gift, and we all made the decision that whoever we give the gift to, we say something about them, something kind and, beautiful, or some expression of gratitude. And she just said, "I'm just so proud of how far you've come," because she said, all that you're doing for yourself and for our family and for other people, she said, "I'm just so proud of that, because I know how much it matters to you to change things and to break this cycle that everyone is in. So many people are in." And that just melted me. And I just thought, oh, but it's been rebuilding that. And I haven't had to try to win my children's respect or anything like that. I'm just now leading by example, and I'm living it and rebuilding our relationships. Not that they were ever like, I think we still had many positives, but I'm doing so much better now. I feel so much better about it, and I know so much more, and there's so much more still to know and grow and learn.
Yeah, if I may ask, do you believe that the responsibility of repairing that relationship is on the parent or the child, and why?
Oh, I'm pretty strong about this. Adults need to learn to adult for kids' sake. There's plenty of adults who are still operating and functioning as children, but then I say children, I'd say immature. There are plenty of mature kids. It's a level of maturity. It's emotional maturity. It's emotional competence. Have you learned that or not? Because there's adults that are still having adult versions of 2-year-old tanties, 2-year-old meltdowns. There's plenty of them losing their shit, cracking it, having outbursts. And the parents that I see, they're always describing, I've got this child who's disruptive, has outbursts, has meltdowns, or is withdrawn. They're talking about the behavior. But there's something that's driving that behavior. That's the tip of the iceberg stuff. That's what we see. But what's driving it? So it's your state of mind. It's your emotional state. It's what's going on in here that's driving the external behavior. So when we ask, who's responsible? Who's responsible for helping our kids, our young people, learn how to be emotionally healthy, how to be mentally healthy, mentally flexible, emotionally flexible, living aligned and true to your values and true to your soul self? Who's responsible for helping kids learn that? How are kids going to learn that if they haven't got adult role models doing that, living that? So I guess my answer is this is why I'm working with adults, because we are never going to change this paradigm of anxiety going up unless we address the adults who are raising the kids or teaching and educating the kids, because they're the ones who are influencing the kids and the kids are learning from them. Does that make sense?
It does. And it leads me to this age old joke where you have people thinking that it's not my responsibility to nurture children in this way. They may say that there's a roof over your head, there's food in your belly. What more do you want? And I think
Yes.
that's a very like old fashioned 1800, let me go milk the cows, oxen running down the street type of way. Because when you break it down, we as human beings, we know we know how we wanted to be parented, right? Because we can all grow up and say that this is what I didn't want as a child. But strangely enough, many of us will repeat that with our children and not see that connection. As you mentioned, it's being passed down generation to generation. Or another approach, which I believe sometimes it's so disruptive and so toxic, is we have multiple children and we're becoming parents in this one blanketed way, meaning that I'm going to raise each child exactly the same way, even though it's three different sets of personalities. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes as parents, the ones I deal with, I speak with, who I coach, is they'll spend an unusual amount of time with the underachieving child, neglecting the child that is achieving and letting them know that, hey, you're doing well. I'm going to give you some attention too. We
Yeah.
unfortunately give attention to the quote unquote bad one and not enough attention from the good one because we feel that they're going to be okay anyways. Let me focus all
Mm.
my attention. But one of the worst things that can ever happen to a child that is performing well is when they see that and they stop performing and stop achieving just to get a reaction. They may break something which is totally outside of their personality. Have you helped parents with that? And if so, how do you help them to understand that each child is a different person and a different way to parent them?
Oh, such a good question. I love that question. Let me just go back to the what more do you want? You raised that. That's a good one too. The what more do you want? Um, if we're saying that, it's a sign to us we don't know what they need. Yeah.
That makes
So,
sense. That makes
yeah.
completely a lot of sense.
Yeah. So even if I've taken you to the park already. We've been to the park. We've been to the shops. I bought you this, whatever. I often say we're missing the mark. We're missing the mark. That's not what your kid needs. You think those things are going to make them happy, but that's not what they need. What is it that your child really needs? And that's when we need to get really curious and get to know our child. And as you say, every child is different, completely different, in fact. This whole idea of they're a mini me and they're just like their brother or their sister. Yeah, there's lots of similarities. I get that. But every child is a unique human being. They think for themselves and they've all had their own unique experiences. So no child can be raised exactly the same, because even if they go to school, their school day might have been very different to their brother's school day or their sister's school day. Or even if they may have had very, very different experiences. And some of them could be trauma related, some of them could have been fantastic. So, and their interpretation of the world and their trust in the world could be quite different because of different experiences. So we need to tune into that and nurture and support our children through the tough times, the good times, whatever. So unless we become attuned to what kids really need, and I teach this to parents, learning how to tune into what your child actually needs. And I'm talking about their emotional needs. Most parents get the physical needs, pretty good. The sleep, the food, the basic physical stuff, the shelter, those things we pretty much get that they need those things. But I'll tell you what, that's not enough. That's base level. Now it's the emotional needs. In fact, I believe the emotional needs are what they really need. That comfort, that security, to know that your mum and dad get you, to feel understood, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel connected, to feel like you belong. These to feel like you matter, to feel like you're valued for who you are, to feel like your opinions and thoughts and beliefs matter, to be respected. All of those things, kids need those things. And it could be that maybe your child who's got back from the park and starts whinging, maybe they're dysregulated, maybe they've got some emotional thing that they don't know how to express to their parent, or they kind of think, or maybe they don't even know what it is because unconsciously it's moved into their unconscious and they're out of kilter because they're not in the habit of talking about and expressing what they need and even recognizing what they need. So the children often don't even recognize it. So that's where, if you've got an adult who really has high emotional competence, high emotional literacy, if they've got that, then they're able to help see past the behavior, the whinging, and see, and maybe they open up a conversation and they say, something seems to be bothering you. Are you okay? What is it? Is there something that's bothering you? And it could be that 3 weeks ago, this kid at school said this to them and it's been festering away inside them, but they haven't really recognized the link. And now suddenly it's coming up because we've opened up the window with love and compassion, not what's wrong with you? What's wrong now? Instead, we're opening it up. Are you okay? There seems to be something. I've noticed you've been a little bit down, a bit, unhappy the last few days or something. And let's kind of, and they're only going to open up if they feel safe enough to do that and not be judged. So it's without judgment. It's with love, compassion, and no judgment. So I guess that's a really big part of the developing this connection with your kids and tuning into your kids and dialing into, I often say to parents, we've got to dial into Terrain FM right now. Like, I'm going to speak to you and tune into you right now and not just make it all about me. And I want to dial into that FM and learning the skill to dial into your child's FM station. They're actually on a different radio station to their brother or sister right now. And we got to, and there's static, and it's awkward. And then we tune in and boom, it plays sweet music. And there's connection. And there's that joy and that trust and that respect. And that's what I want to build in parents and kids. And it's the adults that need to learn how to do that, how to tune in to what their child needs. And adapt, this adaptability. We need to have flexibility to be able to adapt. I always say we need to meet kids where they're at, regardless of their age, regardless of a label they've got, whether they've got ASD or ADHD or anxiety, whatever. We need to give that child in front of us what they need.
So let me ask you, because you mentioned ADHD and these other mental health issues, and which is far more than the physical, because it's easy to look at a child and say that, okay, you're bad in school, let me give you some focus and some attention. Okay, go be good. Or you fell down, okay, let me kiss your boo-boo and off you go, right? Those are, I think it's the simplest approach. But what if you have someone that's in a situation where, as you mentioned, there's some type of medical trauma anxiety? It could be, let's say, the ADHD, it could be, let's say, diabetes, it could be something going on with them on an internal level. How would we,
Mm.
as parents, say that, okay, I want to be there for my child. I want to be strong for my child. I want to be an example because this is something that's new to them. It may even be new to the parents. But as you mentioned, we still want to dial in into that child and help them grow through it and walk that path through it. So, how would you do that for someone who's going through something on a medical level?
Okay, great. So I guess the key is to learn how your child ticks and increase your understanding as to what's contributing to them feeling anxious if they are feeling anxious. So what is it? Is it their mind state? ADHD kids, can their mind's just buzzing and it can be very in overwhelm and they can get in overwhelm very quickly and they can find it hard to have structure and routine and things like that. And they don't actually like it, but it's actually the very thing they need. So if we know that, if we know they're going to resist it, but it's what they need, we learn ways, clever ways of giving them structure and organisation and routine that they are happy with. And we work with them. We don't work against them. So we learn what works for our child in that particular circumstance. And then, you said if they've got illness, for example, many kids worry about illness, so that creates anxiety. So like you said, with diabetes or something. So let's minimize the anxiety by being that support person for them so that you're their guide to help them through it so that they build confidence that they can handle it. So I often say, instead of bossing, I say, let's stop selling, telling, and yelling at our kids. Because we keep telling, selling, and yelling. So many parents just
Describe
tell.
those. Describe those for me,
Yeah,
because
so
I'm so
telling.
curious.
So telling, you need to do this, you need to do that. Oh, come on, you've got to do that. Or we over explain things like kids. Seriously, adults love to over explain, and we've lost them at 3 words in, but we keep explaining and we keep over explaining and telling them, and they're just la la blah 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 in their head. Maybe they're doing it, maybe they're not doing it, obviously, overtly, but it's still happening. We've lost them. So parents love to tell. They love to tell kids what they need to do and how they need to do it and all this, give all this advice. And I'm going to say uninvited advice. So one of the big skills is to invite your child into a conversation instead of just start it and vomit your ideas all over them. When they didn't get any buy-in. So that brings us into the selling. And we start selling our ideas onto them. Oh, you're going to love it. You're going to this. Oh, it's going to be fantastic. Or, oh, this is the way it should be. And this is how it should be. And blah, 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 blah. We go. And it's like, I'm going to say to you, Terrain, buy this pen. It's the best pen. And you're thinking, be quiet. I don't need a pen. What are you talking about? And I'm going, oh, no, you've got to have this one, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just selling my idea onto you. And you're not buying. And this happens with parents all the time and kids. The kids aren't buying. You're just trying to sell your idea, sell your opinion, sell your thought onto them and hope that they just follow suit. Well, then it's actually the worst way to do it. It's like, go away, I'm not listening. And we might politely, if we're, in that mood, we might politely, yeah, okay, mum. But boom, that disappeared because that didn't land. Because unless we tune in, we're just making it all about us. So there's the telling, which is giving advice. You need to do that, and then the selling is we're trying to sell our thoughts, our beliefs, our opinions onto them, instead of helping them form their own opinions and being curious. What do you think? What when they say something, instead of shutting them down, listen and go, oh, that's interesting. That's cool. Oh, you see it that way, do you? Be open. It's okay. We don't have to just try to manipulate our children to fit the square that we think the picture that they need to fit into. So that's the selling. And then the yelling, well, that speaks for itself. That's us dysregulated. It's got nothing to do with the kid. It's us being in a dysregulated state. That's us not being able to handle the emotional challenge that's happening right now. So we hike up and we're out of control. We're not able to manage our emotional state in a mature fashion.
You mentioned something that I'm connecting it, and it reminds me of a situation in my life where you gave the yelling, telling, and selling. And we deal with that when it comes to our children. And I've noticed, and you've probably seen this, as adults, we still adopt that same behavior in our interpersonal interactions. And it reminded me of when I used to date this girl and she was yelling on the phone about something. And I put her on speakerphone and I put the phone down and I ended up doing 2 loads of laundry before she even stopped yelling. Right.
Yes.
But as adults, you mentioned it's an act of immaturity because we don't ever grow up and become full function adults. We're just adults in age, but in our mindset, we're still very immature. We're still that 5, 6, 7 year old where we yell to get our way. We sell to get away. We tell and we tell and we tell and we tell to get away. Very similar to how we would treat our children, or maybe treating our partners, our friends, right? And it shouldn't be in a situation where you have to sell someone to be with you. You have to yell at someone to understand you. You have to tell someone to buy into you. So when you have these adults who are taking this type of approach, not only with their children, but in their day-to-day life, what are some of the commonalities that's maybe blocking them from breaking that cycle and understanding and realizing what they're actually doing?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a big one. That's huge. So most people are doing this unconsciously. They're unconsciously unaware that this is what's driving their behavior. And for most of us, look, we all do it from time to time. We're not going to be perfect. It's having that awareness that we're doing it. So firstly, we need to have the awareness that we're doing it. And then we need to kind of accept it and own that we're doing it. And then we need to do something about it. So I say, there's 3 A's there. There's awareness, there's acceptance, and then there's action. We actually act and do something differently once we're aware of it. But if we don't have any awareness that this is an unconscious pattern that's driving us, the person that was yelling at you on the phone, she was convinced you were the problem. She wasn't seeing herself as the problem and her behavior as a problem at all. She was, or whatever she was whinging about was the problem. It wasn't her. So that's that disconnect of not realizing, oh, hang on a minute, there are a few things we can control, and that's how we respond to certain challenges. So are we taking responsibility, or the word respond, or responsibility, able to respond?